professionals, or people who work in advocacy, or people who work in lobbying, or media who work with such terms, and who analyze all lobbying work, must be a communicator in these difficult times. Because firstly, lobbying and advocacy, it's about constructive dialogue, it's about efficient dialogue, dialogue without populism, dialogue without some polarization, dialogue without rights or rights messages, so it's constructive dialogue. And today we will talking about this industry, government relations, public affairs, advocacy in every country, and it will be a pleasure to see position from post-Soviet Union countries, from here, Brussels, the heart of communication, policy making, but also lobbying, as you see all these buildings near our press club, so it's all about lobbying. Also we will understand how we can work, for example, in every country directly, in Estonia, in Poland, also in African country. I think that its experience can be useful for everyone who take part from the side of stakeholders, for example, who work in government, who work in parliaments of their countries, and also for persons who work in lobbying and advocacy sphere. You know, I were on some conference after inauguration of Trump in Washington, D.C., and we talking with political managers of United States about new ethical problems in our work. And I think it's also extremely important to talking about micro-targeting, to talking about new communications in our sphere in lobbying and advocacy, and to talking about privacy, because it's a trend of new age. And of course, we use all these tools in our work, but we must use them very in a responsibility way. Now let's get started, and I wanted to introduce you my colleague, Sien Allers. She is very experienced business event moderator and TV presenter. Maybe somebody know about her work. And if I understand right, I also will be a speaker on this panel discussion. So thank you, and have a productive work today.
Good morning to all of you. I am indeed straight from Brussels, so my home is very close by. My name is Suying Aat. It's a Chinese name, but I think you all saw that there's not much Chinese about me, unless my first name. I am indeed beside a female entrepreneur, because I have a business here in Brussels where we make tailor-made visual communication material. I'm also working as a freelance journalist for Canal Z, which is a channel both in Dutch and in French, and I'm working for both parts. And I'm very happy that I've been asked to be the moderator on this first debate, a debate where we want to talk about the power to influence and to influence on power. And what are government affairs about today, and how can we put them in an international perspective? We're going to talk about government relations, lobbying, public affairs, advocacy, and we have an amazing panel indeed. And I want to have a dialogue on what all these terms stand for and how business to government and government to business relate to one another. And of course, I think there's a big challenge for lobbyists to find a correct balance between the soft and the hard power in their negotiations. Because I suppose that the future has got some challenges, and I would like to talk about those main challenges in government relations. But I would also like to find out whether those challenges and opportunities are different from one region to another and from one country to another. But let me first start to introduce you to our panel. today, the 4 speakers on the panel. And maybe when I call your name, you can join us on stage. The first one is John Frank, and he's the Vice President, European Union Government Affairs at Microsoft. And I suppose you all know Microsoft, so I don't need to explain anything about Microsoft to you. Normally, we were gonna have Mustafa Moharam with us. He's a political communication expert with qualifications in aspects like policy analysis, media relations, public affairs, government relations and communication in Egypt, Middle East and Africa, but unfortunately he could not make it today, so he will be not with us on the panel, but maybe in the discussion after the questions I asked to our panel, some of you might have some experience on the African continent that he could share with us. And the second man we have on our panel is Frank Schwalbe-Haas. He's a former politician, founding member of the German Greens, and former member of the European Parliament. So please join us. And indeed, I'm very happy to also have at least one lady here with us today, Katrina Darchenko. She's a senior partner of the Strategic Information and Communication Group in Ukraine, and also a president of the Ukraine Association of GR Professionals. Very welcome, all of you. And let's directly start.
Maybe you join us.
Oh, it's okay. No, it's okay. Hold on, I'll stay here. Public affairs, public advocacy, government relations, lobbying. Actually, all in one, we are talking about, I think, the same, different names for the same thing, actually. At least that's my opinion. It's about a dialogue and communication between government and business, and vice versa. And we all know that Microsoft is, I think, a leader in that sphere, because of course it's a very large company. The market is worldwide. So I guess as a big company you will have to build bridges between the company and all of the possible stakeholders. And of course, building relations with various governments is one part, and a common practice, I suppose, at Microsoft. So my first question is for John Frank, and I hope you don't mind that I call you with your first names. Let's go for the softer version of lobbying, and I will... So, you're an experienced professional. What, for you, is the subtleties in GR in various countries? How would you personally call the dialogue you have with governments and the state power?
So at the outset, Microsoft's an extremely successful company that has been part of a broader movement of the technology industry that has, say, radically transformed our lives. And you can't expect to change the world and not have the world push back and impose its own changes. And so at Microsoft, we've certainly, over the course of my 20 plus years dealing with government affairs in Brussels, experienced times when government pushed back pretty hard. And the competition case is when, for those who remember, that there were really tough times for Microsoft. And I think we've learned from that very much. And so we've matured. We've tried to learn the lessons along the way. And we're fortunate that we've got a very dynamic business and a very, we believe, important set of products and services that we bring to the world. One thing I'd say is that, first of all, perhaps the most important skill in government affairs is listening. People often think I'm coming up with my brilliant argument. I'm going to wow them with that. But it starts with listening and understanding. And then often, while you can learn from government, the first people you need to persuade aren't necessarily government. Sometimes you take the message they've got and you've got to go persuade people back at the corporate headquarters that they need to understand that the reality they see is not the reality that government sees. And so, you know, the negotiation is often first with internally, but also then with other people in industry and civil society. And if you can't persuade industry and civil society to come together with you, you're not going to be very successful persuading government. And so it's the listening, it's the dialogue, and creating a consensus around positions that work for government and work for business. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I would frame up the basic approach.
So would you then say that we have to start from the point that people do not see the world as the world is, but that we all see the world how we are? Is that the most important part you have to understand as a lobbyist, that you don't have to come and push too much your ideas forward?
I think you have to understand the world, right? And understand that different people have different perspectives. And it's great that you've got yours, but that's just only, you know, it's good that you know what you want, but it's an interactive process.
Okay. Katrina, you're a representative from the Ukraine GR. Is it a powerful tool in your society? How do you feel about it?
You know, we mostly work with post-Soviet Union countries, so Moldova, Ukraine, Bulgaria, all these countries live in post-Soviet Union syndrome, you know. So it's not Soviet Union tradition of communication with one political force, but it's also, you know, Soviet practices. When people used to give bribes, for example, and you know that in Ukraine we have 5-6 oligarchs, in Moldova they have 1 oligarch. And we must understand that developing, you know, civilization lobbying or good practices of lobbying, like Mr. Frank said, lobbying like communication and like arguments, it's quite hard. So mostly when we work in these countries with multinational companies, they understand European style or American style lobbying. We haven't so strictly regulation like in the United States, but in European Union you also haven't so strictly regulation. For example, in aspects of foreign agents and transparency register for foreign agents like in the United States. And I think that mostly of people who use classical government relations, public affairs, lobbying, advocacy practices in those countries, they understand that it's not more efficiency, but it's also cheaper. So they understand that policy analysis, work with think tanks, with NGOs, communication with governments, parliament and other structures, municipal power, it's more efficient and cheaper than give bribe. And it's important like culture. It's reality, yeah, and I think that you must know this reality, and maybe you understand also people who work in Italy, they also said that it's not very clear also. But really it's important to build other type of communication, because I think that people who work in lobbying and advocacy, they really important part of good policy making. So that's why, for example, we from association write lobbying law and give this law to parliament. Now it's in committee. And also we do big research, big pool about lobbying, so how people in post-Soviet countries understand lobbying at all. And very big thanks to media, because more than 30 media in Ukraine and 5 big channels do TV programs and media projects about lobbying, and people now can deeply understand what is it. That it's not only communication in cabinet of, for example, member of parliament, it's also hard work in strategy way. And it's, I think, important for post-Soviet Union countries.
So a lot in strategy, be prepared, and not only talk with the government, but also talk with the media is in a way what you say. We heard some complaints lately that we should bring the softer version, as we know it in Europe mostly, back to a harder version of lobbying, as we know it in the States. But I think we don't have to forget that in the States, lobbying has been there for centuries already. So it's something that is very stable and accepted, I guess. So I would like to go back to John. In your opinion, that success of business to government dialogue, does it really depend on how the company deals with it, or is it in a way very important how the legislation around the policies, is that of a greater importance?
Well, I'll just say, lobbying in Washington, D.C. is, it's similar, but different. And we have a fairly large group of, team here. We've got about 30 people in our Brussels office doing government affairs work. And our Washington, D.C. office is probably a group of about 40 people. So, we have significant presence where we cover different policy topics and different constituencies that we relate to. A clear difference is, I'd say, Brussels there's still plenty of politics here, but the balance between politics and policy is much more heavily weighted towards policy here than in Washington, D.C. And in a sense, the politics here it's a matrix of national interest and sort of party coalitions, but Washington, D.C. is just sharply partisan. It's just Democrats versus Republicans, and it's
easier? Would you say it's easier?
Well, it's easier if you're in power. I much prefer the Belgian system, Brussels system. The other thing is, in Washington, D.C., you've got political action committees. And so corporations all have political action committees, and special interests all have political action committees that donate money to political campaigns. And so a big part of Washington, D.C. is having people show up to the congressman or senator's fundraiser with a check, and just that is what one does. It's not bribery. It's all about it's transparent and publicly documented. I prefer the Brussels system. Again, I think the money in politics is from political action committees probably is not a helpful thing.
Something that I found quite interesting when we were talking before we started, you were telling me that the group of people you were working with in DC was mainly lawyers, but here the mix is, were you in the same function? Did I understand
I think
that in the States you're more like know the law and that's at least what you have to do, and here you have some more communicative people in your team?
Our team here, we've got a mix of, there's some of us are lawyers, some of us are economists, we have a data scientist, we have people with business and economic backgrounds, so kind of a full range of skills. The United States legal education is different, but it's kind of it's a graduate program, and people come out of it with some very good reasoning skills. Many of them don't want to practice law in a traditional sense. And so, Washington, D.C. is filled with people who've got law degrees who work in this space.
But you think it's important to have a variety on the team?
Absolutely.
That
because
is doing
the people,
understand.
you need a diverse team. And certainly, here in Brussels, you want diverse nationalities, you want gender balance, and just because the people you're engaging with represent the diversity of society.
Yes.
And it's important to get that diversity in your own team to understand it so you can best engage with the world.
Okay. I'm quite curious now to have a little bit of your ideas, Frank. First of all, you are one of the main founders of the Green Party. And I think we all have to admit that the Greens are quite well and very good influencers in the political movement in our European countries. So first, to understand a little bit better for me and for the audience, the people that don't know you, how do you find yourself at the top of this party, and what was your path to get there? Sure.
It's very easy to answer. No. Yes. It's very easy to answer. The Greens, especially in the beginning when I was there, we had a rule: mistrust your leaders. That means, and you all know it, when you become a leader, suddenly you grow by 6 centimeters and you think you're the center of the world. Therefore, we have the rule you have to step down at a certain moment, which was a wonderful experience. I was the MEP, everyone loved me, and I had to step down. My girlfriend said to me, "Frank, pay attention. 80% of the love is not because what you think are your qualities of your job." But she was wrong. It was 95%. It is a very, very healthy experience when people suddenly don't greet you anymore in the elevator.
Okay.
Before were your best friends. But now on lobbying, congratulations. I had for 3 years an office in Kiev, in Kreshatik, therefore I know a little bit the situation in your country. And I'm fascinated that you choose this item for this event here. Because you have, to make a simplistic relationship between oligarchs and politics. And that you challenge this, and that you are looking what way would be productive. What other way, and not only between business